"Open the door for mercy's sake!" The thunderous knocking pierced through the howling storm, making young Osric jump from his straw mattress. Outside their humble mill, rain lashed against weathered wooden walls as if the heavens themselves sought entry. The boy, barely 11 winters old, glanced at his father who was already reaching for the iron latch. "Remember what I taught you, son," Edric whispered, his calloused hand resting momentarily on Osric's thin shoulder. "We never turn away a traveler, especially on such a night." When the door swung open, the wind thrust in a tall figure wrapped in a sodden cloak. The stranger stumbled forward, his boots leaving muddy prints on the packed earthen floor. The dim light from their single tallow candle caught the glint of something metallic beneath his muddied garments. A chain of fine craftsmanship, perhaps, or the edge of armor. "Gratitude," the man said, his voice cultured despite its weariness. He pushed back his hood, revealing a face with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to assess every corner of their modest dwelling. Though caked with mud and sporting several days' growth of beard, there was something in his bearing that spoke of authority. "Osric," Edric nudged his son, "heat the barley soup. Our guest needs warmth." The boy hurried to the hearth where embers still glowed, adding kindling until flames licked upward. As he stirred the pot of yesterday's soup, he studied their visitor from beneath lowered lashes. The man's hands were not rough like his father's. They lacked the calluses of daily labor, yet they bore small scars that hinted at skill with weapons. "Your hospitality honors you," the stranger said, accepting the wooden bowl Osric offered. "Many doors remained closed to me this night. Those who deny shelter have forgotten what it means to be human," Edric replied simply, breaking their last loaf of bread into 3 uneven pieces. He pushed the largest toward their guest without hesitation. Osric watched the stranger's eyes widen slightly at this generosity. Their own bellies had known hunger too often of late, with the Lord's taxes growing heavier each season. "The storm caught me far from my companions," the man explained between careful sips. "I was separated during a hunt." "A noble's hunt?" Edric inquired cautiously. Something flickered in the stranger's gaze. Caution, perhaps, or amusement. "Yes, though I find myself humbled by circumstances tonight." "Nobles know little of humility," Osric muttered, earning a sharp glance from his father. The stranger's mouth curved into an unexpected smile. "Perhaps you're right, boy. Tell me, what has taught you such wisdom at so young an age?" Emboldened by the man's lack of offense, Osric replied, "Last winter, when the fever took half our village, Lord Anselm's men still collected grain taxes. My mother," his voice faltered. "She didn't survive," the stranger finished gently. Edric cleared his throat. "We manage well enough. The mill provides, though the Lord takes his portion first." Their conversation continued as the storm raged outside. The stranger asked questions about their lives, the village, the harvest, showing interest that surprised the boy. Most travelers spoke only of themselves or slept immediately, but this one listened as if their simple existence held secrets of great value. When time came to sleep, Edric offered their visitor his own pallet, taking for himself only a threadbare blanket on the floor beside Osric. "I cannot accept," the stranger began. "You can and will," Edric insisted. "A proper host ensures his guest rests well." In the deepest hour of night, Osric awakened to see the stranger standing by their single window, staring out at the moon now visible through breaking clouds. Something gleamed in his hand, a heavy ring that caught the moonlight and cast fractured patterns across the wall. The man's profile seemed different somehow, regal in its stillness. "Is something wrong, sir?" Osric whispered. The man turned, slipping whatever he held into the folds of his cloak. "No, child. Sleep. Dawn comes soon enough." Morning arrived with birdsong and clearing skies. Osric rose to find his father already at work, but of their visitor, only an impression in the straw pallet remained. On the rough-hewn table lay a single object that made Edric's face drain of color when he saw it. A heavy gold ring bearing a royal seal, 3 lions surrounding a flaming star. "Father?" Osric questioned, reaching for the ring. Edric caught his son's wrist. "Leave it. That seal belongs to the royal bloodline alone." "But why would he?" "I know not, son, but this is trouble. Mark my words." 3 days passed in nervous anticipation, each approaching rider causing Edric to tense. On the 4th morning, their fears materialized as a column of mounted knights crested the hill, armor gleaming in the autumn sun. At their head rode a man whose velvet cloak and disdainful expression proclaimed his rank before he spoke a word. "Sir Anselm," Edric murmured, wiping flour from his hands as he stepped outside to meet them. The mounted lord surveyed the mill with contempt. "Edric the miller, you and your son are summoned to Caerwyn Castle." His gaze hardened. "It seems you've harbored a fugitive of great interest to the crown." Villagers emerged from nearby cottages, gathering at a cautious distance. "We sheltered a traveler caught in the storm," Edric replied steadily, "as any Christian soul would do." Sir Anselm's laugh held no warmth. "A traveler? Is that what you call the man who left this?" He held up a parchment bearing the same seal as the abandoned ring. "We knew not who he was," Osric blurted, stepping forward despite his father's warning hand. "A likely tale." The knight's eyes narrowed. "The charge is treason. Seize them both." As rough hands grabbed them, Osric caught a glimpse of the mill's wheel still turning peacefully in the stream, oblivious to how swiftly fortunes could change, just as the stranger had been when he knocked upon their door in darkness, seeking only shelter from the storm. The journey to Caerwyn Castle was a humiliation crafted with cruel precision. Sir Anselm had ordered Osric and his father bound at the wrists and forced to walk behind the mounted knights. By midday, Osric's thin shoes had worn through, leaving bloody footprints on the king's road. When he stumbled, the knights laughed. When Edric tried to help his son, they struck him with the flat of a sword. "Father," Osric whispered, as they crested a hill that revealed the castle's imposing silhouette against the afternoon sky, "what will become of us?" Edric's face remained stoic, despite the bruise darkening his cheek. "Keep your head high, son. We did nothing wrong by showing kindness." Sir Anselm overheard and wheeled his destrier around. "Nothing wrong? You harbored an enemy of the realm, Miller." His gaze fell on Osric with particular contempt. "Your brat will learn a valuable lesson today, that common blood earns common justice." The castle gates opened like the maw of some great beast. Osric had never seen walls so high or stones cut so precisely. Servants and guards paused in their duties to stare at the bedraggled prisoners, whispering behind their hands. A group of noble children, dressed in fine wool and leather, pointed and snickered as Osric's bloody feet left smears on the immaculate courtyard stones. "Look at his face," one boy jeered. "Dirty as a pig." "Probably smells worse," added another, pinching his nose dramatically. Osric felt his cheeks burn with shame, but remembered his father's words and kept his gaze forward. The castle's great hall loomed before them, its massive oak doors carved with scenes of hunts and battles, victories of the powerful over the weak. Inside, the hall stretched longer than their entire village square. Brilliant tapestries depicting heroic knights and cowering enemies adorned walls of polished stone. Ornate candelabras cast dancing light across the assembled courtiers who had gathered to witness the spectacle. Their fine clothes and jeweled fingers spoke of wealth beyond Osric's comprehension. At the far end, upon a dais of black granite, stood an empty throne. Beside it sat an elegant woman, whose silver-streaked hair was bound in an intricate pattern beneath a circlet of gold. Her features might once have been beautiful, but years had hardened them into a mask of cold authority. "The Queen Mother, Lady Iseldra," someone whispered reverently. Sir Anselm strode ahead, dropping to one knee before the dais. "My lady, I present the traitors who sheltered the fugitive." Lady Iseldra's gaze passed over Edric briefly, before settling on Osric with mild curiosity. "This child is a traitor to the crown?" "He and his father provided sanctuary to a man who carried documents of grave importance," Sir Anselm replied. "Documents that rightfully belonged to Lord Regent Baldwin." A murmur rippled through the hall at this name. Osric had heard tales of Lord Baldwin, the king's cousin who had assumed control when King Alaric vanished 2 moons past. Some said the king had abandoned his duties for a pilgrim's life. Others whispered of assassination. "And what became of these documents?" Lady Iseldra asked. Sir Anselm hesitated. "They were not recovered, my lady, but this miller's boy was seen speaking privately with the fugitive." "I only offered him soup," Osric protested, earning a sharp cuff to the ear from a nearby guard. "Silence when addressing your betters, peasant," the guard growled. Lady Iseldra's mouth curved in something approximating amusement. "Let the child speak. What sort of treason does one plot over soup, I wonder?" Emboldened but terrified, Osric stepped forward. "We didn't know who he was, my lady. He came during the storm, seeking shelter. My father taught me we should never turn away a traveler in need." "How quaint," remarked a richly dressed courtier. "Country virtues for country folk." Laughter rippled through the hall, sharp as daggers. "And what did this mysterious traveler look like?" Lady Iseldra pressed. "Tall, with blue eyes like winter ice," Osric replied honestly. He spoke gently, but his voice made people listen. The Queen Mother's expression changed subtly. "Indeed. And did he give a name?" "No, my lady. But he left this." From inside his threadbare tunic, Osric withdrew the heavy ring they had found on their table. Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Sir Anselm lunged forward, snatching the ring from Osric's small hand. "The king's signet!" he exclaimed, examining it. "So you admit to stealing from the royal person?" "We stole nothing," Edric interjected. "It was left as payment for our hospitality." Sir Anselm's face contorted with rage. "Lies! No noble would leave the royal seal with peasants. You must have stolen it from the traveler while he slept. Or perhaps," came a new voice from the hall's entrance, "it was given freely as a token of gratitude." Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a man Osric recognized instantly despite his transformation. Gone were the mud-splattered clothes and unkempt beard. In their place stood a figure of quiet authority, dressed in midnight blue velvet with a simple crown of black iron upon his brow. A collective gasp rose from the assembled courtiers, followed by the rustle of dozens dropping to their knees. All except Sir Anselm, who remained frozen in disbelief, and Osric, who simply stared in wonder. "Your Majesty," Lady Iseldra breathed, rising from her seat. "We had feared that I was dead?" King Alaric finished, his voice carrying effortlessly across the now silent hall. "Or perhaps that I had fled." His penetrating gaze swept the room before settling on Lord Baldwin, who had gone deathly pale beside the throne. "I'm afraid I've disappointed those who had already begun dividing my kingdom." The king strode forward, his boots echoing on stone. When he reached Osric, he paused, studying the boy's bloody feet with a frown before continuing to the dais. There, he turned to face the assembled court. "For 2 moons I have traveled my realm disguised as a common man," he announced. "I wish to see with my own eyes how my people fared, not through the lens of lords who show me only what they wish me to see." His gaze hardened as it fell upon Sir Anselm. "I learned much about you, Sir Knight. How your taxes crushed the villagers of Eldhollow. How fever swept through their homes while your granaries remained locked. How you dine on venison while children starve." Sir Anselm's face had drained of color. "Your Majesty, I only sought to maintain order." "Silence," the king commanded, not raising his voice yet somehow filling the hall with its power. "I also learned much about true nobility." His eyes found Edric. This miller shared his last loaf with a stranger. His son offered me soup when they themselves had little. They gave me their bed while taking the floor. The king descended the steps, approaching Osric once more. "And when morning came, I left my ring deliberately, curious what would happen." His lips curved into a smile tinged with sadness. "I wondered if they would sell it. Many would have. Instead, they kept it safe, even knowing it might bring trouble." Turning back to the stunned court, King Alaric's voice grew stern. "In my absence, I find my realm corrupted by greed. Lords who forget their duty to protect those beneath them. A regent who too eagerly claimed my throne." His gaze fell heavily on Lord Baldwin, who seemed to shrink visibly. "And knights who burn mills and terrorize children in my name." With a gesture both graceful and final, King Alaric extended his hand toward Sir Anselm. "Your sword." Trembling, the knight unsheathed his ornate blade and presented it, hilt first. The king took it, examining the jeweled pommel and gilt crossguard. "A beautiful weapon," he observed. "Far too fine for a man with an ugly heart." With sudden force, he brought the blade down across his knee. Metal shrieked, then snapped, the broken pieces clattering to the stone floor. Silence hung heavy as death in the hall. "You are stripped of title and lands," the king pronounced. "Leave my sight and my realm by sundown." As guards escorted the disgraced knight away, King Alaric turned finally to Osric and Edric, who stood forgotten amidst the drama. With his own hands, he untied the ropes binding their wrists. "You offered shelter to a stranger," he said softly. "Now let me offer the same to you." The days that followed passed in a daze for Osric, from sleeping on straw in a mill to lying beneath velvet coverlets in a castle chamber. The transformation seemed a fever dream. Servants who once would have shooed him from the kitchen door now bowed as he passed. Yet for all its splendor, the castle felt like a gilded cage, its stone walls closing in where once he had known the freedom of open fields. "Stand straighter," instructed Master Thaddeus, the elderly chamberlain assigned to transform the miller's son into a proper royal page. The man circled Osric like a hawk, adjusting the fall of his new woolen tunic. A slouching posture suggests a slouching mind. Osric tried to comply, though his back ached from hours of standing at attention. "I don't understand why I must learn these things," he ventured. "I'm just a miller's boy." Master Thaddeus sniffed disapprovingly. "You are now a page in the king's household, a position countless noble sons would sacrifice limbs to attain. His Majesty has shown unprecedented favor by elevating one of common birth." His bony fingers tilted Osric's chin upward, "which means your every misstep will be scrutinized by those who resent your presence." This was no exaggeration. During his first formal meal in the Great Hall, Osric had used the wrong spoon for his soup, prompting titters from nearby squires. When he bowed incorrectly to a visiting baron, whispers of "peasant" and "charity case" followed him down the corridor. Worst was the young Lord Edmund, Sir Anselm's nephew, whose narrowed eyes promised retribution for his uncle's disgrace. Only with his father could Osric find moments of normalcy. Edric had been granted a position overseeing the royal granaries, work he understood and valued. Each evening they would meet in the small chamber they shared, away from judging eyes. "How fare you today, son?" Edric would ask, his weather-worn face creased with concern. On this particular evening, Osric could not maintain his brave facade. "I don't belong here, father. They all know it. I hear them laughing when I make mistakes." Edric's calloused hand settled on his son's shoulder. "The tallest wheat draws the most wind," he said softly. "You stand where none of our station has stood before. But why did the king choose me? I did nothing extraordinary. Kindness without expectation of reward is extraordinary in these times." Edric's eyes crinkled. "Besides, you have a gift for seeing truth in people. You saw the man beneath the mud that night, not just a sodden traveler." Osric pondered this as he drifted to sleep, his father's steady breathing a familiar comfort amid strange surroundings. Morning brought new challenges. King Alaric had announced a royal hunt, and all pages were required to attend. Osric had never ridden a horse before arriving at court, and his lessons had been brief and painful. Now he found himself atop a spirited chestnut palfrey, trying desperately to remember which rein did what. "Try not to fall off before we leave the courtyard," Lord Edmund sneered, guiding his magnificent destrier alongside. "It would embarrass us all." The hunting party assembled in the castle bailey, a sea of prancing horses, eager hounds, and nobles adorned in their finest riding attire. King Alaric appeared last, his tall form easy to distinguish among the courtiers. To Osric's surprise, the king rode directly to him. "How sits your mount, young Osric?" he inquired, genuine interest in his voice. "Uneasily, your majesty," Osric admitted, earning a warm laugh from the king and horrified looks from nearby nobles. "Honesty, refreshing at court." The king's blue eyes sparkled. "Stay near me today. I would value your company." Lord Edmund's face darkened with jealousy as the king's entourage departed, Osric remarkably positioned at the sovereign's side. They rode through autumn-touched forests where leaves formed a golden canopy overhead. Osric gradually relaxed, finding rhythm with his horse and venturing occasional questions about the woodland plants they passed. "You have an observant eye," the king noted, when Osric spotted a falcon's nest high in an ancient oak. "My mother taught me to notice small things," Osric explained. "She said beauty hides where most never look." The hunt progressed successfully, with several deer taken by the royal archers. As servants prepared to transport the bounty back to the castle, King Alaric led a smaller party deeper into the forest, following reports of a magnificent stag seen in the area. The forest grew denser, sunlight filtering through in scattered patches. Osric marveled at ancient trees wider than 3 men could encircle, their moss-covered trunks like pillars supporting the green cathedral above. Birds called warnings of their approach, and somewhere nearby, water tumbled over stones. "We should find the stream," the king suggested. "Game often visits at midday." They dismounted in a small clearing beside a brook, tethering the horses to low branches. Osric helped gather wood for a small fire while huntsmen scouted ahead. As flames crackled to life, the king seated himself on a fallen log and gestured for Osric to join him. "Tell me, how do you find court life compared to the mill?" he asked. Osric hesitated, uncertain whether truth or flattery was expected. "Speak freely," the king encouraged. "I value honest words more than pretty ones." "It's beautiful and terrible all at once, your majesty," Osric confessed. "The food is wonderful, but I miss the smell of fresh flour. The beds are soft, but I lie awake missing the sound of the mill wheel turning. And the people," he trailed off, mindful of speaking ill of nobles. "The people look at you as if you are a curiosity rather than a person," the king finished gently. "I understand better than you might imagine. A crown creates similar distance." Before Osric could respond, a commotion erupted from the trees. The hunting party's dogs had startled something, but not the stag they sought. Instead, a massive wild boar burst into the clearing, tusks gleaming and small eyes bright with fury. Men shouted in alarm, scrambling for weapons. The king rose swiftly, reaching for his sword, but the beast was already charging. Its trajectory aimed directly at the monarch, who had somehow become separated from his guards in the confusion. Without thinking, Osric grabbed the only weapon at hand, a burning branch from the fire. As the boar closed the distance, he thrust the flaming wood toward its face with a shout. The animal veered, momentarily startled by the fire and noise. In that critical instant, Osric snatched a small leather pouch from his belt, the same sling he had used to chase birds from the mill. His fingers worked with practiced efficiency, loading a smooth stone as the boar recovered and prepared for another charge. The king had drawn his sword, but stood at a disadvantage on the uneven forest floor. With a silent prayer to Saint Hubert, patron of hunters, Osric whirled the sling twice and released. The stone flew true, striking the boar directly between its eyes with a sickening crack. The beast staggered, momentum carrying it forward several more paces before it collapsed mere feet from the king. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the heavy breathing of men who had expected to witness their monarch's death. The king himself stood motionless, staring at the fallen beast, then at the simple sling still dangling from Osric's trembling hand. "By all the saints," breathed Lord Gareth, the king's master of hunt. "The boy killed it, with a peasant's toy." King Alaric stepped carefully around the massive boar, approaching Osric with measured strides. The boy stood frozen, suddenly aware of what he had done. Interrupted a royal hunt, seized initiative when surrounded by knights and nobles, used a commoner's weapon in the royal presence. "I'm sorry, your majesty," he stammered. "I didn't mean to." "To save my life?" the king interrupted, his voice steady despite the near miss. "I think that was precisely your intention." He gestured to the fallen boar. Royal spears and finely crafted bows stood ready, yet it was a simple sling that prevailed. He turned to address the gathered huntsmen. "Remember this day, when all your training and costly weapons were outmatched by a miller's son with quick wits and a leather strap." Lord Edmund pushed forward, his face flushed with indignation. "Pure luck, your majesty. Any child might have made such a throw by chance." "Then let us see you replicate it," the king suggested mildly. Lord Edmund faltered, looking from the sling to the dead boar and back again. "As I thought." The king's hand came to rest on Osric's shoulder. "There is a lesson here for all of us. Courage and skill may be found in unexpected vessels." His gaze swept the hunting party, and sometimes, the simplest tools in practiced hands accomplish what the finest steel cannot. That evening, as the court feasted on roast boar, Osric found himself seated not with the other pages, but at the high table beside the king. The court chronicler recorded the day's events while minstrels hastily composed ballads about the miller's son and the royal boar. Courtiers who had previously ignored him now sought his attention, offering congratulations and asking to examine his miraculous sling. Throughout it all, Osric caught his father's proud gaze from across the hall. Edric's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and his slight nod conveyed everything words could not. "You belong exactly where you are." Winter descended upon Caerwyn with merciless intensity. Snow blanketed the castle battlements, and ice crystals formed intricate patterns on window panes. Inside the great hall, enormous hearths blazed day and night, yet cold drafts still found their way through ancient stone corridors, making tapestries stir like restless ghosts. 3 months had passed since the boar hunt, and Osric's life had transformed yet again. No longer merely a page, he had been appointed the king's personal attendant, a position typically reserved for sons of earls or barons. He now wore a blue tunic emblazoned with the royal crest, though his remained uniquely trimmed with unbleached linen, a reminder of his origins that the king had specifically commissioned. The thread of who you were should always be woven into who you become, King Alaric had explained, presenting the garment. Never forget the mill, Osric, even as you learn the ways of the castle. Such wisdom was characteristic of the king, whose reign was increasingly marked by a connection to common folk unprecedented in Caerwyn's history. With Edric now serving as royal master of granaries, changes rippled throughout the kingdom. Grain tithes were redistributed, with villages keeping more of their harvest. Mills received royal charters protecting them from arbitrary taxation. When Osric suggested bringing village healers to share their knowledge of herbs with court physicians, the king established an exchange of medical practices that benefited both traditions. Not everyone welcomed these changes. On this particular morning, Osric stood quietly behind the king's chair in the council chamber, listening as Lord Baldwin, restored to a minor position but stripped of regency, voiced his discontent. "Your Majesty, these innovations undermine the natural order," the Lord protested, his thin lips barely containing his contempt. "When peasants believe themselves equals to their betters, the foundations of society weaken. And yet," replied the king evenly, "when those betters appreciate the wisdom and skills of all their subjects, the realm grows stronger." He gestured toward maps spread across the oak table. "Explain to me again why the northern villages cannot be reached with supplies." Lord Baldwin sighed as if explaining to a child. "The winter is too harsh. The mountain passes blocked with snow. We must wait until spring thaw." Osric bit his lip, fighting the urge to speak out of turn. The king, however, noticed his discomfort. "You have thoughts on this matter, Osric?" Conscious of the councillor's scrutiny, Osric stepped forward. "There is another way, Your Majesty. The shepherds of Eldhollow use hidden paths through the lower valleys. The snow doesn't gather there because of hot springs beneath the earth." Lord Baldwin scoffed. "Nonsense. If such paths existed, our royal cartographers would have recorded them." "Your cartographers likely never spoke to shepherds," Osric replied, forgetting his place in his eagerness to help. "These routes aren't secret by design. They're simply known only to those who tend flocks in those highlands." The king studied him thoughtfully. "Could you guide a supply train through these passages?" "I could, Your Majesty. Or better, my father could recommend experienced shepherds from our village." "So be it," the king declared, rising from his chair. "Lord Baldwin, prepare supply wagons with grain, medicine, and wool blankets. Osric will help coordinate guides from Eldhollow." As the council dispersed, Lord Baldwin lingered, his cold gaze fixed on Osric. "Quite the influential little commoner, aren't you?" he murmured when others were out of earshot. "Enjoy the king's favor while it lasts. Winter storms are unpredictable, as are the fortunes of those who rise above their station." The threat lingered in the air like frost, but Osric had weathered colder winds at the mill. He met the Lord's gaze steadily, until the man turned away. That evening, as Osric helped the king prepare for bed, removing the heavy ceremonial mantle from his shoulders, he found the courage to ask a question that had long troubled him. "Your Majesty, why did you choose me? There were many stronger, smarter boys in Eldhollow." King Alaric settled into a chair before the hearth, the dancing flames highlighting the silver now threading through his dark beard. "When I traveled disguised through my kingdom, I sought to understand why such distance had grown between crown and commons. Do you know what I discovered?" Osric shook his head, carefully folding the royal garment. "Fear," the king said simply. "Lords fear losing power. Commons fear lords' retribution. All fear change." He gestured for Osric to sit on the nearby stool. "But you looked at a mud-covered stranger and saw only another human being in need. No fear, only kindness. Such clarity of vision is rare, Osric, in any rank." The boy absorbed these words, staring into the fire. "Some at court still believe I don't belong here." "Of course they do," the king replied with a wry smile. "You challenge their most comfortable belief, that nobility comes from bloodlines rather than character." His expression grew serious. "But remember this, a throne is merely wood and metal until the person sitting upon it proves worthy of respect. The same is true of any position." 2 days later, the relief expedition to the northern villages departed. 12 wagons loaded with supplies rolled through the castle gates, led by shepherds from Eldhollow who greeted Osric with astonished recognition. Among them was Wulfric, an old friend of Edric's who had taught Osric to use a sling when he was barely tall enough to reach the mill's grinding stones. "Never thought I'd see young Osric giving orders to royal guards," the grizzled shepherd chuckled as they reviewed the planned route. "Your mother would have been proud, boy." The mention of his mother warmed Osric despite the biting cold. She always said kindness would return threefold. Aye, and wisdom tenfold, it seems. Wulfric eyed the royal insignia on Osric's cloak. Though not all celebrate your rise, there's talk in the village. Whispers of those who resent the miller's son who caught a king's eye. Lord Baldwin's supporters? Among others. Wulfric's weathered face grew grave. Watch your back, lad. Winter brings hungry wolves of all kinds. The warning proved prophetic. 3 days after the supply train's departure, a royal messenger arrived with alarming news. The lead wagon had been ambushed in a narrow section of the hidden path. Supplies were stolen, 2 guards killed, and worst of all, the shepherd guides were being blamed for leading the convoy into a trap. The council chamber erupted in accusation when the news was delivered. Proof of peasant treachery, Lord Baldwin declared, pounding the table. I warned against trusting common shepherds with royal resources. Osric stood rigid beside the king's chair, heart pounding with fear for his village friends. The shepherds would never betray your majesty's trust, he insisted. They revere you for the changes you've brought. Then explain the ambush, challenged Lady Iseldra, the Queen Mother. These paths were known only to your Eldhollow shepherds. By your own admission, the accusation hung in the air, damning in its logic. Osric felt the ground shifting beneath him, years of prejudice against commoners resurfacing in suspicious glances from even those counselors who had begun to accept him. Perhaps, Lord Baldwin suggested with false solicitude, our young friends' connections deserve closer scrutiny. After all, he recommended these guides. The implication was clear. Osric himself might be complicit in the betrayal. King Alaric had remained silent, fingers steepled before him. Now he rose, commanding attention without raising his voice. Before we condemn based on rumor and fear, I would know more facts. Who brings this report of ambush? A guard captain stepped forward. A survivor, your majesty. One of the royal guards assigned to the convoy. He rode through the night to bring warning. Bring him before us, the king ordered. The guard who entered moments later bore the marks of hard travel and combat. A bandaged arm, bruised face, torn cloak. He knelt before the king, wincing with the movement. Rise, soldier, and tell us exactly what transpired, King Alaric commanded. Treachery, your majesty, the man reported, his voice rough with exhaustion. The shepherds led us into a narrow ravine where bandits waited. They fell upon us without warning, 30 men at least, well armed. We fought but were outnumbered. Lord Baldwin nodded in satisfaction. As I suspected, these commoners— Let him finish, the king interrupted sharply. Turning back to the guard, he asked, Did you witness the shepherds collaborating with these attackers? The guard hesitated, his eyes briefly flicking toward Lord Baldwin before answering. Not directly, your majesty, but they must have been complicit. No one else knew of these hidden paths. Something in that glance stirred Osric's suspicion. He studied the guard more carefully, the quality of his boots, the way he held himself despite his injuries, the unusual precision of his speech for a common soldier. Your majesty, Osric said quietly, may I ask this brave survivor a question? The king nodded, eyebrow raised in curiosity. Osric stepped forward. You fought valiantly against the bandits. Tell me, how many millstones does it take to grind winter wheat at Eldhollow Mill? The guard blinked in confusion. I wouldn't know such things. Strange, Osric replied, his voice gaining strength. Every child in Eldhollow knows our mill has 2 stones. One for coarse grain, one for fine flour. It's the only dual-stone mill in the northern province. He turned to the king. This man has never been to Eldhollow. Murmurs spread through the council chamber. The guard's face hardened. What game is this? Lord Baldwin demanded. The boy tries to distract us from his people's treachery. No, countered Osric, emboldened by certainty. I question this man's story. He addressed the guard directly. Show us your wound. This is absurd, the guard protested, clutching his bandaged arm protectively. King Alaric's eyes narrowed. Comply with the request. Reluctantly, the man unwound the linen bandage, revealing a cut across his forearm. Clean, precise, and barely a day old. A strange wound for a 3-day-old ambush, Osric observed. And peculiar that bandits would attack your arm, yet leave your face merely bruised. Almost as if— He reached forward suddenly, grasping the man's tunic where dark stains marked the fabric. Rubbing the substance between his fingers, he sniffed, then smiled grimly. Blackberry juice, not blood. We used it to dye festival clothes in Eldhollow. The guard's composure cracked. His hand moved toward a concealed dagger, but royal guards were faster, seizing him before he could draw the weapon. "Search him," the king commanded. From within the man's boot, guards retrieved a small scroll bearing Lord Baldwin's personal seal. King Alaric broke it open, his expression darkening as he read. "Instructions," he announced, "for staging an ambush against our own supply convoy, signed by Lord Baldwin himself." His gaze lifted to the stunned counselor. "You would starve innocent villagers to discredit a miller's son?" Lord Baldwin's face had gone ashen. "A forgery. I would never—" "Save your denials for the magistrate," the king cut him off. "Guards, take Lord Baldwin to the dungeons. Send riders immediately to warn the supply convoy of possible danger." As the disgraced lord was dragged away, shouting protests and threats, the council chamber erupted in confused discussion. King Alaric raised a hand for silence. "It seems," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "that I have been blind to treachery closer than I imagined." His gaze swept the assembled nobles. "But I was not blind in my choice of advisors." He placed a hand on Osric's shoulder, addressing the council. "A miller's son saved our northern villages today. Remember that when next you question whether wisdom belongs only to those of noble birth." Later, alone in the royal study, the king presented Osric with a gift, a simple wooden box containing a silver brooch shaped like a millstone. "Foreseeing truth where others saw only what they expected to find," he explained. "You may have prevented a rebellion today, Osric. Lord Baldwin hoped to turn the north against the crown by making them believe I had abandoned them to winter's mercy." Osric turned the brooch in his hands, its weight unfamiliar yet fitting. "I only asked what any miller's son would know, Your Majesty." "Precisely," the king smiled. "And therein lies the wisdom I have sought to bring to Caerwyn. Different eyes see different truths. We need them all to govern justly." That night, snowflakes drifted past Osric's window as he wrote a letter to the friends he'd left behind in Eldhollow. The castle no longer felt quite so cold, nor its walls so confining. Instead, they seemed to expand with new possibility, not just for one miller's son, but for all the forgotten voices of the realm. Spring came late to Caerwyn that year. When finally the ice retreated and the first green shoots appeared in the royal gardens, they seemed like messengers from another world, harbingers of renewal after the kingdom's harshest winter in memory. For Osric, now 12 summers old and growing taller by the day, the changing season marked 1 full year since the night a mud-covered stranger had knocked at their mill door. 1 year since his life had transformed from grinding wheat to helping shape royal policy. 1 year of lessons in swordplay and statecraft, of suspicious glares giving way to grudging respect, of missing the simple rhythms of village life while embracing the complex melody of the court. "Hold still," chided the royal tailor, adjusting the ceremonial tunic that Osric would wear for the spring festival. "Young men who fidget end up with crooked seams." "Sorry, Master Winthrop," Osric replied, suppressing the urge to scratch where the embroidered collar tickled his neck. The garment was far grander than anything he had ever worn. Midnight blue velvet, adorned with silver thread that caught the light when he moved. Yet true to the king's insistence, its elegant design incorporated elements of Osric's heritage. A pattern of wheat sheaves along the hem and unbleached linen cuffs reminiscent of a miller's practical garb. The king was most specific about these details, the tailor muttered, more to himself than to Osric. "Never in 40 years of service have I been instructed to include common cloth in a court garment, but I must admit," he stepped back to assess his work, "there is something honest about the contrast." When the fitting concluded, Osric hurried through the castle corridors toward the rebuilt East Tower, where his father now maintained his office as Royal Master of Granaries. The position had evolved far beyond its original scope, with Edric now overseeing agricultural innovations throughout the realm. He found his father hunched over a large map, deep in conversation with a delegation of farmers from the western provinces. At Osric's entrance, Edric looked up, pride evident in his weather-worn face. "Ah, perfect timing," he called. "Come explain your irrigation proposal to Master Cedric here." The gathered farmers turned, curiosity in their expressions, as they beheld the king's young advisor in his fine new clothes. Osric saw the familiar flicker of initial doubt in their eyes, the same doubt he had once felt himself when facing nobles. "It's quite simple, really," he began, approaching the table and pointedly rolling up his embroidered sleeves to expose his still calloused hands. "I noticed that the mill streams around Eldhollow never run dry, even in drought seasons. As he explained his idea for channeling water through similar rock formations in the western fields, Osric watched understanding replace skepticism in the farmer's eyes. By the time he finished describing the simple wooden mechanisms that could control water flow, they were nodding and offering their own refinements to the plan. "The boy speaks sense," Master Cedric concluded, his gnarled hand thumping the table for emphasis. "If the crown will provide the timber, we'll provide the labor." Edric smiled. "The king has already approved the resources. Construction can begin after the spring planting." After the farmers departed, father and son stood together at the tower window, gazing out over the castle grounds where preparations for the festival were underway. Colorful pavilions bloomed like spring flowers across the great lawn. Servants strung lanterns between ancient oak trees. In the distance, the spires of Caerwyn village rose beyond newly greened fields. "Are you happy here, father?" Osric asked suddenly. Edric considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Happy? Yes, though in different ways than at the mill." He gestured toward the map on his table. "There, I could feed a village. Here, I can help feed a kingdom. Do you miss it sometimes? The simplicity? Every day," Edric admitted with a soft laugh. The sound of the millstone turning, knowing exactly what each day would bring. His hand came to rest on Osric's shoulder. "But I would not trade what we've gained. The chance to make life better for people like us across the realm." The conversation lingered in Osric's mind as he made his way to the king's private chambers later that afternoon. He found King Alaric not engaged in affairs of state, but seated before a crackling fire, reading from an ancient leather-bound volume. "Ah, Osric," the king greeted him, setting aside the book. "How was your fitting? Did Master Winthrop follow my instructions about the linen cuffs?" "Yes, your majesty," though he seemed puzzled by the request. The king smiled. "Many traditions deserve questioning. Speaking of which," he rose and retrieved a cloth-wrapped object from a nearby chest. "I have something for you." Osric accepted the bundle, feeling its substantial weight before carefully unwrapping the layers of linen. Within lay a sword, not an ornate ceremonial blade like those carried by courtiers, but a practical weapon with a plain crossguard of blackened steel and a grip wrapped in well-oiled leather. Only the pommel showed any decoration, a small silver millstone that matched the brooch Osric had received months earlier. "It was forged by the royal armorer to my specifications," the king explained. "Balanced for your height, though with room to grow. The steel is excellent, simple in appearance but exceptional in quality, rather like its new owner." Osric stared at the weapon, uncertain how to respond. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm no knight." "Not yet," the king replied with a meaningful glance, "though that may change in time should you wish it." The implication sent Osric's thoughts spinning. A commoner elevated to knighthood? Such a thing was unprecedented in Caerwyn's history. "I've startled you," the king observed gently. "Perhaps we should discuss the more immediate matter at hand, your role in tomorrow's festival." Grateful for the change of subject, Osric listened as King Alaric outlined his duties for the celebration that would mark both the beginning of spring and the anniversary of the king's return to Caerwyn. "The royal proclamation will be read at midday," the king explained. "You will stand with the royal council during the ceremony, then assist me in distributing silver coins to the village children, as is tradition." Osric nodded, mentally rehearsing the proper protocol for such occasions. Then a thought struck him. "Your Majesty, might I make a suggestion about the distribution?" "Of course. In Eldhollow, children from tenant farms often couldn't attend village celebrations. Their families needed them working in the fields. The same may be true here." The king considered this. "What do you propose?" "Perhaps we could send royal messengers to the outlying farms, ensuring all children receive an invitation and their parents understand they are excused from labor for the festival day." "An excellent suggestion," the king agreed. "See to it this evening. Now," he gestured toward the sword still in Osric's hands. "Shall we see if Master Harwick's lessons have taken root? The practice yard should be empty at this hour." Dawn broke clear and bright on the day of the spring festival. Osric woke early, excitement and nervousness battling in his stomach as he donned his ceremonial attire with the help of a young servant who still seemed awed to be attending the former miller's son. From his tower window, Osric could see villagers already streaming through the castle gates, dressed in their finest clothes and carrying early spring flowers. Among them would be families from Eldhollow, including friends he had not seen since leaving the mill. Would they still recognize him? Would they think he had forgotten his roots? A knock at his chamber door interrupted these thoughts. A royal page entered and bowed. "His Majesty requests your presence in the antechamber before the ceremony." Osric found the king standing before a large tapestry depicting Caerwyn's founding, a scene of the first king receiving the submission of local lords. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, casting rainbow patterns across the ancient threads. "My grandfather commissioned this when I was about your age," King Alaric said without turning. "I used to stare at it for hours, imagining the weight of that first crown." He finally faced Osric, his expression thoughtful. "Do you know why I traveled my kingdom in disguise, Osric? To see conditions firsthand, your Majesty? Partly, but more importantly, to understand what my people truly thought of their king when they believed no one was listening." His gaze returned to the tapestry. "What I heard in taverns and village squares troubled me deeply. The crown had become distant, feared rather than respected. Lords executed my will without understanding my purpose." He placed a hand on Osric's shoulder. "And then I found myself at a humble mill where a boy and his father treated a stranger with dignity, not because of his rank, but because of his humanity." The king moved to a small side table where a wooden box rested. "Today marks not just the beginning of spring, but the beginning of a new tradition in Caerwyn." He opened the box, removing something that glinted gold in the sunlight. "A tradition of recognizing nobility of character, wherever it may be found." In his hands was a circlet of gold, simple in design yet unmistakably royal, set with a single blue stone that matched the king's own signet. "This is the first crown of service," King Alaric explained, "to be bestowed annually upon one who has served the realm with exceptional wisdom and humility, regardless of birth or station." His eyes met Osric's. "You, Osric of Eldhollow, will be its first bearer." Osric's breath caught. "Your Majesty, I don't deserve such honor." "That very sentiment proves you do," the king replied with a gentle smile. "Now come, our people are waiting." The great hall had been transformed for the occasion, its usual somber grandeur brightened by spring blossoms and sunlight pouring through windows thrown open to the mild air. Nobles in their finest attire mingled with common folk, the boundaries between them temporarily softened by shared celebration. As Osric entered behind the king, he spotted his father standing with the royal council, looking both proud and slightly uncomfortable in his formal robes. Further back, familiar faces from Eldhollow widened in recognition as they saw their former neighbor in his court finery. The ceremony proceeded with ancient rhythms, prayers offered, songs sung, pledges of loyalty renewed. Then King Alaric rose from his throne, signaling a departure from tradition. "People of Caerwyn," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the hushed hall. "1 year ago I returned to this castle after walking among you in disguise. I sought to understand the true state of our realm, not through the words of lords and ladies, but through the lives of those who till our soil, grind our grain, and raise our children." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as many heard this confirmation of long-circulated rumors for the first time. "What I discovered changed the course of my reign. I found wisdom in unexpected places, courage in humble hearts, and in a simple mill on a stormy night, I found the true meaning of hospitality and honor." The king gestured toward Osric. This boy and his father offered shelter to a stranger, asking nothing in return. When that stranger was revealed as your king, they remained unchanged in their dignity and kindness. He raised the golden circlet for all to see. "Today, I establish a new tradition, the crown of service, to be awarded each spring to one whose actions embody the highest ideals of our realm. Let it remind us that true nobility may be found in castle or cottage, that wisdom speaks in many voices, and that the greatest strength of Caerwyn lies not in its stone walls but in the hearts of its people." As Osric knelt before the throne, his thoughts returned to that rainy night when a muddy traveler had appeared at their door. How his father had taught him that every person deserved respect. How his mother, before illness took her, had insisted that kindness cost nothing, yet purchased everything of value. The weight of the golden circlet settled on his brow, light enough to bear, yet heavy with significance. When he rose and turned to face the assembled crowd, Osric saw not a division between nobles and commoners, but a single people united in celebration. Later, as he helped distribute silver coins to village children in the castle courtyard, a small girl with wheat-colored braids looked up at him with curious eyes. "Were you really a miller's boy before?" she asked, her voice carrying the same accent as his own. Osric knelt to meet her gaze. "I still am," he replied, showing her the unbleached linen at his cuffs. "And now I'm also the king's advisor. Both are part of who I am. Could I be an advisor too someday?" she wondered, clutching her silver coin tightly. "Of course," Osric assured her. "In Caerwyn, we've learned that wisdom can come from any voice brave enough to speak truth." As spring sunlight bathed the ancient stones of Caerwyn Castle, something new took root alongside the season's first flowers, not just in the heart of one miller's son, but in the soul of a kingdom learning that true nobility grows best when nurtured in the most unexpected soil. That evening, as lanterns illuminated the festivities continuing into twilight, King Alaric found Osric seated on a low wall overlooking the celebration, the golden circlet resting in his hands as he studied its craftsmanship. "Heavy thoughts for a festival night?" the king inquired, joining him without ceremony. "Not heavy, your majesty. Just full." Osric's fingers traced the blue stone set in the circlet. "I keep thinking of what my father taught me, that we never turn away a traveler in need. A simple lesson with profound consequences." "Yes." Osric looked up at the man who had transformed from muddy stranger to mentor and king. "I understand now why you came to our door that night, but why did you stay? You could have found shelter in many places." The king's gaze drifted over the celebrating crowds below, nobles and commoners alike dancing to the same music, sharing the same food, momentarily united in joy. "Because in your father's eyes, I saw no deference to power, which I might have been seeking, but something far more valuable, recognition of common humanity." He gestured toward the festivities. "This is what I hope for Caerwyn, not just tolerance between high and low, but true recognition that worth comes in many forms." "Do you think it will last beyond today?" Osric asked. "That," King Alaric said with a smile, "depends largely on young advisors like yourself, who can stand with feet in both worlds." He nodded toward a group of noble children now clustered around Osric's friends from Eldhollow, listening in fascination to tales of mill life. Change begins with stories shared, bridges built, hands extended. The king rose, straightening his ceremonial cloak. "Now come. Your father has organized a demonstration of traditional mill dances, and I believe you're expected to lead the first step." As Osric replaced the circlet and followed his king back to the celebration, he felt the weight of both his past and future balanced perfectly, like the millstones that had once been his whole world, now turned to grind the flour of a new beginning. In castle halls and village homes across Caerwyn that night, a new tale began to spread. Of a king who walked as a common man, of a miller's son who rose through kindness rather than conquest, and of a night when shelter freely given changed the course of a kingdom. It was a story that would be told for generations, long after those who lived it had returned to the earth. A reminder that sometimes the most ordinary doorway opens onto the most extraordinary path. Within the ancient walls and beneath bright stars, the people of Caerwyn danced together, high-born and low, their shadows intermingling by firelight, just as their lives had begun to intertwine by royal decree and common consent. And in their midst, still slightly awkward but growing more confident with each step, Osric of Eldhollow, miller's son, king's advisor, bridge between worlds, showed that sometimes true nobility is revealed not in the circumstances of one's birth, but in the simple decision to open a door when someone knocks. Through generations that followed, mothers would tell their children, "Remember the miller's son who showed kindness to a stranger. For in this world you never know when the muddiest traveler might carry the noblest heart, or when the smallest act of decency might change not just a life, but a kingdom." And as dawn approached and the last dancers twirled beneath fading stars, the miller's son and the king stood side by side on the castle ramparts, watching the first light touch the fields and forests of Caerwyn, illuminating a realm forever changed by a storm. A stranger and a simple act of hospitality on a night when kindness opened a door that centuries of tradition had kept closed.